Another important point here is a very open mindset that we need, especially in our research and development organization. So, people in R&D are used to products which they have been working with in the last decades, fossil-based products, where they know how they perform, what technical specifications that they have, and how they can work with such products. And now it's very important to leave that path of fossil-based raw materials and look at alternatives, which might be bio-based, which might just come from a different source, and understand also what are differences in performance and what are pathways on where I could use such materials and such alternatives. And that needs some courage, obviously, a very open mindset. And it's something that we have established very well in our R&D communities.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode in the Sustainability Perspectives podcast series, which continues the discussion led at Packaging Europe's Sustainable Packaging Summit online. Today, we're looking at carbon emission reductions from the perspective of a packaging and chemical company. And Actiga's Dennis Siedman today will talk us through the company's experiences and plans on their journey of reaching their science-based targets, reducing scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, the power of innovation, transparency, balancing varying requirements from regulation to performance, and much more. Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis, for being on the podcast today. I look forward to hearing more.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Great. So yeah, Actiga is part of the Altana Group, which has committed to science-based targets. And I wanted to start off this podcast by asking you, what does this commitment mean in practice for Actiga, and how does it influence your sustainability strategy at a business unit level?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question to start with, since Actiga is part of the Altana Group, and it has been quite a journey since we committed to science-based targets and did all the calculations, the emissions inventory, and so on. And obviously, that also shaped a lot of our actions that we are conducting here at Actiga. So overall, Altana is committed to operating almost greenhouse gas free worldwide by 2050 and to achieve net zero emissions. So that means that we need to reduce our emissions by 90% until 2050 over all three scopes, so scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and to permanently also remove the remaining unavoidable emissions definitely will have. So the course of the Science Based Target Initiative program, these targets have been validated by SBTi and have been approved. And since then, we have established specific programs to actually also work on reducing the emissions that we are generating. Going a bit more into detail of the goals that we have set. So the focus for us is on reducing scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by 90% already by 2040, and to reduce the scope 3 emissions by 90% until 2050. So between 2014 and 2023, we already have reduced the scope 1 and 2 emissions by roughly 70%, and by since 2020, we have been sourcing green electricity, so electricity from renewable resources. That makes our scope 2 emissions reduce them to almost zero. So for us, that is one pillar. I think we can go into a bit more detail on that later on. But looking also a bit downstream at our customers and at our suppliers, it's also very meaningful to discuss our emission reduction goals and work together with our suppliers and with our customers who have also similar targets, obviously. And it's also way easier to talk to such customers and suppliers that participate also in the SBTi program, that have similar goals. So that aligns very well along the whole value chain and makes a lot of sense to work mutually on achieving those goals.
Absolutely, yes. And we're going to dive into that a bit more later. Before we go on, though, I wanted to take a step back for the benefit of our listeners who maybe not may not be as familiar with greenhouse gas accounting. For those people, could you briefly explain the difference between Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions, and also why this framework is so important for the packaging and chemical industries?
Yes, of course. So, that calculation scheme that has been set up in the greenhouse gas protocol defines 3 scopes. So the emissions are separated into 3 scopes. Scope 1 is or refers to direct emissions from sources that we actually operate. So, for example, at our plants, at our operations, at our production sites, burn gas to heat certain vessels or do chemical reactions and so on. The emissions that are generated through the burning through burning that natural gas, those are accounted into the Scope 1. So Scope 2 covers all indirect emissions that we are causing, for example, from purchased electricity, from steam, heat, or from external cooling. So the emissions that are generated and the power plant, which is not directly operated by us, which is off-site, those have also to be attributed to our overall emissions, and those fall under Scope 2. And Scope 3 is the most complex category, I would say, and that includes also other indirect emissions along the entire value chain, meaning upstream and downstream, all the emissions that are generated when producing the raw materials that we are consuming, or through logistics activities, transportation of raw materials, but also transportation downstream of produced finished goods to our customers and so on. And particularly for the chemical industry, Scope 3 is very relevant when we look at materials, raw materials, but also at the use phase of our product, at the end of life of our products. And that is why that concept of Scope 1, 2, 3 accounting is very valuable to learn and understand also where the emissions actually happen and where the hotspots of your products and your value chain lie. When you do that calculation and that inventory, it also is an eye-opener. You see where do your emissions actually happen, how much control do you have over them, and it leads you into a direction of picking up discussions with suppliers, with customers, and to discuss how you can reduce or actually avoid the emissions.
Thank you. Very good to have a refresher on this, and obviously also be aware of what each one does. So, I wanted to start by looking specifically at Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And what are the most concrete steps Actiga is taking today to reduce emissions from its own operations and energy use?
Yes, very good point to start with that. So for Actiga, we have actually 3 levers which are key in reducing our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So for especially looking at Scope 1, energy efficiency and electrification are key here. We continuously improve our processes. We invest heavily into our plants to modernize plants, into our fleets, and electrify wherever it is possible. Some examples that we have implemented over the past years: we have implemented catalytic post-treatment of our exhaust gases at our production sites. We integrate heat pumps wherever possible, or we have heating concepts which use waste heat from our processing, from our production, and use that waste heat to heat up water and heat up buildings and offices and so on. And that is one part where we try to become as efficient as possible to reduce the emissions that we are generating by burning gas for heating purposes, for example. Level number 2, as already been mentioned, since 2020, the whole Altana group has been sourcing electricity solely from renewable sources worldwide. So those emissions in Scope 2 are practically zero, since renewable electricity by accounting do not generate any further emissions. But on top of that, we are also investing heavily into building our own electricity generation by solar panels, for example. For example, at our site, at our production site in Vigo in Spain, we have implemented a huge solar plant. We have just recently constructed solar panels on our roofs here at our plant in Bremen in northern Germany, and obviously use the electricity that is generated there. And the last but not least, the third lever that we can touch is temporary compensation. So the remaining emissions that we are generating in Scope 1 and 2 and in some selected Scope 3 categories will be offset through climate protection projects that we are financing that are outside of our own value chain until we have technical and operational measures that can fully avoid them. So that means we invest into, for example, renewable electricity programs in Asia and South America and so on. Looking ahead, we are also examining topics like logistics and transportation of our produced goods. As a global company, our value chains are also very complex, multinational, and it makes sense to analyze which transport routes appear favorable from an emission reduction. One example here, last year, we sat down with a bigger customer of ours and we calculated the emissions that are generated by transportation of the products from our different production sites to the customer's different production sites. And we checked where we can switch from truck transportation to rail transportation, for example, shorten some routes, maybe combine packaging and so on. And overall, we came up with a reduction potential just for transport emissions by more than 30%. And that's obviously a task that is quite tedious, and you need to invest a lot of work and need some more details on also your logistics partners. But overall, it provides lots of potential to easily reduce emissions without touching a product or without developing any new materials.
Thank you. And obviously, you mentioned previously that Scope 3 emissions are often the most complex to sort out. And how do you approach this challenge across a complex value chain?
So Scope 3, as mentioned, is a complex category. It contains 15 subcategories going from materials and so on, from transportation, from leased assets as well, upstream, downstream transportations and so on. And for us, as for the majority in the chemical business, I would say the most relevant ones are category 3.1, which is the purchased goods and services, and also category 3.10, which is the processing of our sold products. So looking at category 3.1, the goods and services, we are accounting here for all cradle-to-gate emissions of the purchased products and services. So from raw material extraction to manufacturing, to transport and so on, to the tier 1 supplier. And for Actega, this includes the resins that we're using, the monomers, pigments, additives, solvents, and so on, and everything that we are buying from the market and then transforming into our end products. When keeping inventory in that category, the first step is to try to understand the actual data. So collect data from your suppliers, capture and track supplier-specific product carbon footprints, CO2 data, also look at the quality of that data, exchange with the suppliers to understand how they generate that data and so on. That's one important task to know also the variation and the differences in quality levels of the PCF data. Then also, it's very important to sit down with your key suppliers and to discuss what are their strategies to actually reduce those emissions on the products they are producing. It's by expansion of renewable electricity usage, to use alternative solutions, alternative raw materials at their site, come up with something completely new, completely innovative, like new synthesis routes or whatever that are more energy efficient and so on. Or look also at bio-based solutions that could be implemented. That's then for the raw material category. Looking also at the use phase of our products, that's also a large category for our emission inventory. So category 3.10, that concerns emissions that are happening during further processing of our product. So whenever we sell something to our customer, the customer needs to apply the product, invest or cause emissions by drying the product, for example, or actually applying it and using it. That is also accounted into our Scope 3.10 emissions. And here we are looking at systems which are more energy efficient, which, for example, use lower temperatures to cure. One example here are our low cure systems, which operate in ovens at way lower temperatures. Typically, when you apply a coating, a lacquer, you have temperatures between 250 to 270 degrees Celsius. To achieve those temperatures, lots of natural gas need to be burned. And whenever you come up with an alternative that could perform technically on the same level, but would cure at lower temperatures, in that example here at 195 to 200 degrees Celsius, that would reduce the amount of gas that is burned. And therefore, you save energy, you save gas, and therefore also reduce the CO2 emissions. So another alternative here to gas-driven curing systems or by drying systems is to work with solutions which are completely free of solvents that don't need to be dried at higher temperatures. For example, UV curable systems here, which are just dried by running through a UV oven, which is obviously run by electricity, and therefore the only emissions that might be caused here are by generating the electricity. And therefore you can also, from case to case, reduce the emissions based on the processing itself by roughly 40%. We have some examples here in our product portfolio, and those are in the market now, becoming more and more relevant, and more users, downstream users, are now looking at such solutions to drive down their emission generation as well.
I wanted to zoom in a little bit more on the raw materials, which obviously play a significant role in the Scope 3 footprint. How are you engaging with your suppliers and partners to drive down these emissions?
Yeah, here the situation is becoming way better. If you would have asked that question 5 or 6 years ago, the answer would have been completely different. At that time, it was quite hard to find suppliers which have a good overview of their data, which also take emission reduction seriously and want to engage also in reduction programs for the emissions they are causing. And now with the rising participation in SBTi programs, for example, and also with sustainability becoming more and more relevant for the chemical industry, also companies and suppliers that can provide good data, which are companies who are eager to work with you on reduction programs on the rise, I would say. So for us, when we engage with our suppliers and partners, it's important to have a mutual goal to discuss about data they can provide, data we can use, data we can provide also back to our partners, to transparently communicate where hotspots are in the whole value chain, in their processes, our processes, and also processes of our customers, and to network with those suppliers to find alternatives and find measures and solutions to reduce emissions in the end. Solutions could be here the further utilization of green and renewable electricity, which we are now pushing a lot. We are engaging with our suppliers to understand what is their renewable electricity strategy, what's the current percentage, when do they want to be in 2030, 2035, 2040, 2050, and so on, and what impact does that strategy on renewable electricity have on the product carbon footprint of the products we are buying from them. Besides that, we want to completely and entirely understand the sustainability roadmap of the suppliers. What innovations will they come up with in the future? How can we participate? How can we also provide some input into those strategies and into the products that might come up in the future? Another important point here is a very open mindset that we need, especially in our research and development organization. So, people in R&D are used to products which they have been working with in the last decades, fossil-based products, where they know how they perform, what technical specifications that they have, and how they can work with such products. And now it's very important to leave that path of fossil-based raw materials and look at alternatives, which might be bio-based, which might just come from a different source, and understand also what are differences in performance and what are pathways on where I could use such materials and such alternatives. And that needs some courage, obviously, a very open mindset. And it's something that we have established very well in our R&D community. So people are very eager to understand where they can work with alternative raw materials, what potential solutions they can develop with that, and how they can implement that also at customer projects. So that's one thing I would say where Actiga is specifically good at, driving innovations, having an open mindset, engaging with suppliers, coming up with new solutions, which are then ultimately used in our R&D and end up in new processes and new products. There are some examples that I could give you here. I think we have in the past also discussed a lot about our EcoLease technology, which is a new metallization approach to reduce traditional foils and save material and CO2. We have now in the past developed also solutions for wash-off primers, which improves the recyclability for shrink sleeves, for example. We have entirely new low migration inks and coatings for energy efficient LED, UV processes, and so on. And to develop those, you need a very different approach, very innovative mindset to come up with such solutions.
So encouraging that things are definitely moving in the right direction across the board. So I was wondering, how do you balance sustainability goals with performance, regulatory requirements, and customer expectations? Obviously, especially in highly demanding packaging applications.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Basically, Actiga supplies lots of materials into packaging and especially into food packaging applications. So for us here, there is no compromise on regulatory aspects. So we need to fulfill the migration standards. We need to fulfill the different regulations on a global scale. And just coming up with a solution that is, from a sustainability point of view, maybe better by emission reduction or whatever, but could not fulfill those regulatory requirements. That's a no-go in the industry. That doesn't work. So for us, it's very important here to have an open communication with our project partners from a project start on. So to understand what do our customers require, also from a regulatory perspective, but also from a technical perspective, obviously. Transport that also to our suppliers and bring that all together within our R&D, and to then just work with materials, work with technologies that can obviously fulfill all of that. So there's a clear target definition, which is important, and we do partner with customers and with suppliers which have which follow that approach. So which have also an open mind, which also look at alternative routes for their products and for the raw materials that they are supplying for us. And that means also at their end that a drop-in solution is not always possible. So when you just take a product and say, I want to replace that product with something that is more sustainable, that might mean that you have to walk an entirely new pathway and come up with a new processing idea, come up with a complete redesign of your product to make things work and to also implement the products that we can supply to the customer with a better sustainability profile. So that is important to partner with such partners which understand that and which also want to walk that extra mile and implement such new solutions.
And I also wanted to ask you, transparency is critical to credibility when it comes to emissions. And how do you track and measure your progress against your climate targets? And how do you ensure that the measures taken actually deliver measurable impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we also invest huge effort into tracking that. So we anchor the sustainability goals into management KPIs and steer those via a group-wide climate strategy. So we obviously measure our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions according to the greenhouse gas protocol. And especially now for the raw materials and also for the use phase and so on, we use supplier-specific data where that's possible. So otherwise, if there is no data available, we use industry factors that are widely available. Also, we have external verification, which provides a scientifically robust framework and looks at our data, how we how we do the calculation, and also the assumptions that we might have to make, and that is externally verified. And that is providing the framework on a corporate level, how our emissions are tracked and how they are developing over time and reduced. So operationally, as I said, we rely on electrification, on renewable electricity, and that also has an impact then on the emissions. When we look at the products that we are bringing to the market, we are also tracking sales of our new and sustainable solutions. We see how they perform in the market, how they can maybe be tweaked. We work very closely with customers and with our brand owners who implement such new innovations and such solutions, and recognize our materials, and we partner with them then to tweak them over time, because we are all learning in the value chain how emission reduced products perform and how we can improve them over the long run.
I wanted to find out, looking ahead to the nearer future, what's next for Actiga on its sustainability journey, sort of immediate steps in the near future.
We continue to drive our energy efficiency and our material innovations. We are now scaling technologies like the EcoLeaf technology that I have previously mentioned, where we reduce the use of foils with a high waste impact in the market. We have other technologies like our Signite technology that you can also find some information on our website, which reduces the material consumption in labels. We strive to continue working very closely and cooperate more closely with SBTi-bound suppliers and customers. That's becoming also more important for us. Customers, suppliers that speak the same language, that have the same goals. It's easier to align with those. Over the last years, I have also seen lots of very interesting technologies in the chemical sector, which have been evolving over the years. And for 2026, for me, it seems that is a focus year for many of those technologies to develop, to scale. So I think overall in the next years, and especially in this year, we would see rising availability of certain alternative raw materials, of products with lower emission profiles, and hopefully also at a price competitive level for some sustainable chemical raw materials. Price competitiveness is a good keyword. Nevertheless, we still have the global situation. We have global uncertainty. We have high energy costs, especially in Europe. And we have lots of pressure applied on the European chemical landscape, which might at that end also bring some surprises over the year. So for Actiga, and also as a message maybe to the industry, it's important to remain transparent, increase transparency, especially on a data level, work hand in hand, share data with your suppliers and with your customers, and engage in innovation partnerships. And just by following through on that, that is the way to credibly achieve net zero in line with SBTi and in line with the goals that have been defined in that program.
Great. So to wrap up our conversation today, I wanted to get your take on what advice would you like to share with the broader packaging industry as it works towards decarbonization?
The packaging industry faces some very special challenges. Now in 2026, the packaging and packaging waste regulation will come into force in August, and that brings also lots of opportunities looking at recyclability, looking at becoming more sustainable, but also it still brings some uncertainties with it. We are now discussing a lot with our customers and with stakeholders in the industry about some interpretations of the PPWR, looking at PFAS, for example, and how to define that, looking also at the recyclability standards and evaluations that are set in the regulation. I think that will be the driving factor for the packaging industry in this year. Nevertheless, the PPWR also provides us with plenty of opportunity to work together. It asks for lots of transparency on packaging, on material, on recyclability performance in the end. And it will also encourage people to get together, to talk about products, talk about improvements. And in the end, when you look at the end of life of packaging and recyclability, that will also have a direct impact on emissions that are caused by packaging. And therefore, I think that hopefully in the end will be a driver for the industry to become more green, to become more sustainable.
So it's definitely a great hope for 2026. I think it'll be an interesting year for the packaging industry altogether. Great. That brings us to the end of our conversation today. Thank you very much, Dennis, for being here and sharing your insights.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And quick reminder to everybody, in 2026, Packaging Europe Sustainable Packaging Summit will take place in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And the date will again be from November 10th to November 12th, but this time it will be from Tuesday to Thursday. And also make sure you subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you might be listening to it so you don't miss out on any of the latest episodes. Thanks very much. Goodbye.